Just as New York City school children are about to return to the classrooms this week, a new report out by the New York City comptroller finds that some of the neediest students are being overlooked. The findings indicate that despite spending $372 million on special education programs during the last school year, the Department of Education did not provide support services for nearly 14,000 special needs students. The report also highlights that in parts of the Bronx, less than 10% of those students with special needs were getting all of the services requested.
Yeah, Comptroller Brad Lander says there's a better way to make sure special needs students are getting the services they require, but it's going to take some course correction to make it all happen. Comptroller Lander joining us this morning to explain what that looks like. Good morning, sir. We appreciate you being with us.
Good morning. It's nice to be with you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we got you. All right,
I'm having a little...
Let's get right into it. There's an estimated 200,000 students with special needs enrolled in New York City public schools, but rather than spending the money on students, your study found that a huge chunk of that money is being spent on due process claims. What's that all about?
So that's right. So what we want to do, of course, is provide those services to kids in their schools, or if they're in preschool, provide some wraparound supports. But too often we're failing to do that. And as a result, if parents know, they can bring a lawsuit. If they bring a lawsuit and it goes through the system, then a judge or hearing officer may order that they have money that they can spend on those services elsewhere since the school failed to provide them. And those claims have skyrocketed from $33 million a decade ago now to $372 million. They've gone up more than tenfold. And yet they're not allocated evenly, so Black and Latino kids are much less likely to get them. We don't know anything about whether those services are provided effectively. And in a few cases, there's even been fraud. So what we recommend is beefing up the resources that the school system uses, hiring and licensing trained professionals, paying them enough to provide the occupational therapy, the speech therapy, the reading assistance, and the support, because we know and the evidence shows when kids with special needs get the services that they deserve, they really can thrive, and we've got to make sure every kid gets that chance.
Yeah, and we know the need is so great. Another finding here in your report is that a majority of the special needs students who are not getting the services they need are in communities of color. Is that because the process is perhaps maybe a little too complicated and not as intuitive as it should be? What do you think is the barrier there?
Look, I think what's happening is that families with more resources are more able to navigate this complicated litigation system. And that's why what we need to make sure is that schools are providing these services on the front end, and we're not relying so much on the courts as a way of allocating those services.
All right, well, let's move on to this one. Now, the Department of Education recently invested more than $50 million in programs for students with dyslexia, autism, and emotional disabilities. But here's what they had to say about your report. What it says is the DOE is tremendously proud of this innovative specialized program and services we've developed, and this administration's unprecedented commitment to growth and equity. We appreciate the comptroller recognizes those advances and investments and agree more must be done. Now, how do you respond to that?
Well, I appreciate this is one time when I think we're pretty much on the same page. You know, the Adams administration and I aren't always seeing eye to eye on everything. We had some critical reports of their homeless service efforts. But in this case, I agree. Those new resources for folks, kids with dyslexia, have been great. They've got a great new program that targets kids who may have some behavioral issues. But they agree and we agree more needs to be done, because we can't have 13,000 times when kids aren't getting the IEP services, the special needs services they're entitled to. We can't have 10,000 kids in preschool who aren't getting the special needs services right at the start of their educational journey. So though that $50 million is a great first step, we're going to have to invest some more money in the short term. But if we can reduce those claims, those lawsuits, we will save money in the long term.
So another big issue that will definitely impact the school year is, of course, the influx of migrant students who enrolled, 19,000 of them to be exact. So is the city in a good financial position to make room for all of these students? Was there perhaps a buffer put in place to account for them going into this school year?
We have plenty of room. We're down more than 100,000 students, since the pandemic. So it's not like the housing situation where there's kind of a housing crisis and now we have to find additional housing for asylum seekers. Plenty of room in the schools. And we've budgeted for, roughly that larger headcount. So, the challenge is making sure we have the dedicated services where those kids are. Obviously, some of those kids will need a Spanish-speaking, language competent social worker. And we don't know whether the school those kids are going to show up in on Thursday, depending on what shelter they've placed in, whether that school will have that resource already. So there's definitely going to be some work at the start of the school year as principals see who shows up and what their needs are. That's going to involve some scrambling, but we've got the seats, we've got the resources, and we know if we give those kids an opportunity that a lot of them will learn English quickly, will fit right in, will be great classmates.
All right, a lot of other things on the city's plate, too. The closure of Rikers Island, one of them. It's another issue we'd like you to weigh on this morning. Mayor Eric Adams says it's not realistic to shut the jail complex down in 4 years, as the law mandates. He says it's going to become a public safety issue, since, of course, the borough-based jails might not have enough room to hold all of the inmates. Now, from a financial standpoint, does it make sense for the city to stick to this 4-year timeline to shut down Rikers?
So while I agreed with the mayor on the school special ed and that dyslexia resource, this is an area where we disagree. The mayor has not implemented the plan that is necessary to close Rikers Island. So trial times are way up from before the pandemic. So people are awaiting their day in court much, much longer than they were, almost 50% longer. We're not doing what's necessary to get those trial times down. We've got about 6,000 people at Rikers. Over 1,000 of them have severe mental illness, but we're not implementing the mental health programs in our public hospitals and at Bellevue that would make a difference in helping people get well. It is cost effective. And it is far more humane and successful to implement the plan that the council adopted and that the mayor said he supported while running. So what I would push is let's not fuss over whether the date is 4 years from now or 5 years from now. Let's get back to implementing the plan, speedier trials, mental health programs, supportive housing, programs that make sense for our communities and for our city.
All right, on the same page there. And Comptroller, before we let you go, we do want to ask you about the SAG-AFTRA strike, which is about to hit the 2-month mark here. It is not only crippling Hollywood, but also hurting everyday New Yorkers whose pensions are now being tied up in all of this. So can you expound on that?
Absolutely. So, the comptroller's office, we invest the pension dollars that are retirement security of 750,000 retired and current teachers and school crossing guards and firefighters and on and on. And those folks have their pensions invested because their unions fought for and won good retirement security. And some of that money is invested in these studios. And so the pension funds, we wrote a letter, all 5 pension funds wrote a letter to the studios saying, get this strike settled. Our union workers want to see these union workers back to work with a good contract and thriving. That's how we build an economy that works for all of us.
All right, it's definitely going to be a busy fall. Comptroller Brad Lander, we appreciate you taking time to spend a moment with us on your Labor Day to talk about these important issues. We appreciate it.
Great to be with you. I look forward to seeing Dan and Hazel out on the Parkway.
They'll be there, 1 o'clock.
Take care. Good to see you.